While playing MapleStory Worlds, you may have come across certain scenarios where when a player attacks, the enemy takes damage, or if you step on a lever, a trapdoor opens. In all cases, something in the world interacts with another, and some sort of event is raised. In our case, we're going to implement an event system where if you press a button or trigger a lever, the time of day changes. Let's get started. Before we dive into Maker, let's first run through a quick overview of events. Events are comprised of three different parts: the event itself, which contains the event information and data to be transmitted, the event handler, which listens in on the event and processes the event when it's raised, and finally the event sender, who sends the actual event to the target entity, logic, or service. Once we've defined the event that we'd like to send, we can send the event from a component or a logic file to an entity so that we can communicate that some sort of action has happened. Once we've sent the event, various components, regardless of whether they're attached to the entity or not, can target the entity and listen in on events that occur on this entity. When registering a handler, we do have to make sure that we are targeting the correct entity to listen in on. If the handler is listening in on the wrong entity, the handler's code won't be processed. Events don't have to be sent strictly to entities, however. We can also send events to services such as the input service for player input events or room service for player entry or exit events, as well as events sent from your own logic scripts. Other components or logic scripts can then listen in on different events being sent to entity, service, or logic scripts to process events depending on where the event is being sent to and where it's being handled from. And with that overview out of the way, let's head into Maker and walk through today's project. So here we are in Maker, and as always, we're going to move into the Create New, and Create New to create our new world. Let's select the simple black template and click Create New. So here we have our template, and first thing we're going to do is let's build our night system. So here we are in Maker, and the first thing we're going to do is let's look at how we're going to manage our day and night system. So let's create a new folder. Let's call it Common. And then inside of this folder, we'll create a utils. And then let's create another folder called Time Management. Inside of here, let's create a material. And let's name this Night Mat. And in this material, let's select the Blend Multiply. And what we're going to do is inside of our maps, let's find the background object. So that's this object right here. And we have a slot to set the material. Let's set this material to our night material. And if we now change our blend color to something else, we can see that our background color is changing. So let's select a relatively reasonable color here for our night. Let's maybe do something like this. Okay, that looks good. And we do need to keep this hex code in mind for later, but for now we'll just leave it as is. And what we're going to do to change between night and day is to manipulate this blend intensity. So as we go from 1 down to 0, you can see that we can blend between our original color, which is the original day color, and as it increases to 1, we can blend into our night color. So we want our blend intensity to be at 0 initially, and through script, we're going to manipulate this intensity. So let's create a logic script, and let's name it World Time Management. Let's double click to open this up. And inside of here, let's create a property for our hex code. So let's do color hex. And then let's grab the night color that we want, copy that, and let's paste that in right here. And we're gonna remember to add the little hash symbol. We're going to add another variable here for our component. And we're going to reference this background component. So let's search for background component and let's name it BG. And inside of here, let's grab our background. So it's this object right here. Let's also add a reference to our tile map. So let's grab a component and then let's do tile map component. And then we'll name this tile map. And then we're going to grab this tile map. It's the only one in this map. And then the final thing we're going to do is we're going to create a table for our material properties. And this is going to be a variable to contain the properties of our material so that we can manipulate those. So first with this tile map, what we're going to do is we saw how we can manipulate the background color with this night material. But we'll notice that the tile map component does not have a slot for material, so we're going to have to manually assign the color. So let's grab our color here and let's try pasting that in as our night color. And we can see that our tiles have also been kind of tinted with our new color. So if we set this blend intensity to 1, this will be the final look for our night. Let's reset this blend intensity back to 0 and then set the tile map color back to white. But we're going to fade between our two colors from white back to our desired color. So let's set this back to white and press confirm. So the first thing we're going to do is let's add an onBeginPlay method. And we're going to set this as a client-only method. And let's initialize some variables. So we're going to initialize some private variables. Self.t color equals color from hex code. So we're going to convert from this hex code, self.colorHex, into our color variable to store the color type. We're also going to make sure that the color.alpha is 1. Because when we convert from hex code, it does not set the alpha, so we're going to make sure that the alpha is 1. The other variable we're going to set is we're going to set the material ID. So we're going to do self.bg.material ID. So this will be the material that is assigned to the background, this material ID here. So we're going to grab that ID and store it in a private variable. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set our material properties to manipulate our material values. So the value that we're going to manipulate is just the blend intensity from 0 all the way to 1. So let's set self.materialProps equals 2, and we're going to do blend intensity. And then we're going to set that to 0 initially. And that will be our material properties all set. And then we're going to just manipulate this value and assign that using our material service to our material. So let's now add another method for set time. And this will also be a client-side method. And let's set this to a number and do time. So we're going to set our value from 0 to 1. So this time value will determine the time of day in our world. So if the time is 1, then the blend intensity will be 1, meaning it is nighttime. If the time is 0, then the blend intensity will be 0, meaning it will be the original color, and thus setting our time to the daytime. So we're going to utilize a tween logic here, and we're going to use the makeTween method from the tween logic to pass in our current material properties blend intensity and go from the current blend intensity up to our desired time. For the duration, we're going to set that to 2.0, so 2 seconds. We're going to set our ease type to just be a linear transition. And then for our function, we're going to create a new method on tween. And we're going to assign a parameter and name this value that we're going to call at every iteration of the tween until it reaches the time. So inside of our onTween, let's set our material props blend intensity to the value. So again, every time this tween runs, it's going to be slowly increasing or decreasing to match our target time. So every time it changes, we're going to set our blend intensity to the new value, and then we're going to use material service, change material property to set the material ID that we grabbed to our material property. So we're passing in our material properties and assigning that to our material. Then we're also going to change the map color. So the map color will use our color lerp to transition between white to our final color. So this will be the color here at the current value. So whatever our value is, it'll transition between our first color to our target color at a rate of this value. So at value 1, it will be our target color. At value 0, it will be white. Lastly, we're going to create a private variable to cache our current tween, and we're going to also double check if there already is a tween running. Then we are going to stop the current tween before we run our new tween. So sorry, this should not be a boolean, this should be a number. Okay, so that's it for our day and night cycle. That hopefully was pretty simple to understand. And now we are going to move on to the actual events. So we have the ability to call world time management and use the set time function to pass in our desired time and set our day. So the next thing we're going to do is let's hop into our UI and we're going to create two buttons. So let's duplicate this button and let's rename this to button day. And let's move this somewhere up here. So let's set this maybe to the top, -100. Let's say -150. Let's change the text in this button to say set day. So let's increase the width a little bit. Let's make it 300 maybe. And let's make sure that it completely fills our UI box. So we've got our set day button. Let's duplicate this and let's set the height to the same height. And let's set it at +180. And let's change the text to set night. And now we're going to use events and listen in on the input services button event to listen in on whenever this button is clicked. So how do we do that? Let's first create another folder and name this UI, and let's drop some of our UI stuff in here just so that we're a little bit organized. And let's create a logic script and let's name this, let's say player HUD. And let's double click to open this up. And let's create our two variables. Don't need to sync that. And let's create an entity reference to our two buttons. So let's say button day and button night. And let's set our first two. Let's search for button day. And let's make sure to rename this here. Name this to button night. And then let's search for button night. And then inside of our onBeginPlay, we're going to hook up our button behavior. So whenever you're working with UI, it will always be client side so that you can reference these buttons as they don't have a server side component. So we're going to do self.buttonDay, and then we're going to use connect event, and we're going to pass in the button click event, and we're going to create a function, and we're going to do self set time. We're going to create this method set time, and let's add a parameter to our value. And then let's say for button day, we're going to set the time to 0, and for button night, so let's just copy and paste this in and replace this with button night. And we're going to set this to 1.0. And then inside of our set time, we're simply going to call world time management set time and set the time to our value. So that should be it. Let's press play and check to make sure it works. Let's name this world day night events. And if we do set night, then we can see our night is now toggled on. So we can switch between day and we can switch into night. But notice that our character doesn't actually change the color, which makes it look a little bit strange. So let's go into our default player and let's also assign our player material to our night material. So whenever our night material is modified, it also updates the properties for all entities and all renderers that are referencing that material. So if we set night, then we can see that our player material is also changing colors. And when we set back to the day, we can see everything kind of smoothly transitions, which is perfect. So now we understand how to use connect events to create an event raised and cause some sort of behavior to happen at the time of the event being raised. So effectively, the listener is just this function here. However, I also mentioned the ability to listen in on events from different components or entities. So let's right click and let's create a component, and let's name this custom player component. And let's drop this into a new folder and name this player. And if we double click to open that, we can create a method and name this toggle day. And we're going to receive a Boolean event for our state. So this will be whether it's either on or off. What we're actually going to do is we're going to create another entity here. So let's create an empty entity and let's name this switch. Let's add our transform component and let's add a sprite renderer component. So for our sprite renderer component, we are going to just use my two IDs here for the toggle on and toggle off states. For our switch, let's create another component for our switch. Let's name this switch and create a component called switch component. And let's attach this to our entity. And if we double click to open that, let's create two properties here. Both of string, and we're gonna do trigger on RUID and trigger off RUID. And we're going to assign both of those inside of our inspector. Let's say on is this one, and let's say off is this one. Okay, so what we're going to do is whenever a player enters into the trigger's range, we're going to activate and we're going to toggle our date on or off. So let's add a trigger component. And we can see if we edit, the green circle here is our trigger range. So this is also an event that is sent and that we can listen for as well. So if we go into our switch component, we can go into our event handler and we can search for trigger enter. So this event will be raised whenever we enter into this trigger. And we can see the execution space here, that it's being executed both on the server and on the client. So if we only want our event to be raised from the server, which we do, we can check for the client. We can use isClient or isServer to return whenever it's either the client or the server. In our case, we only want this trigger event to run on the server. So in the case of the client, we can return. If your intent is to execute different code depending on the client versus server, you can use the isClient or the self isServer to differentiate your code between the client and the server side on this event. In our case, whenever our trigger event is called, we're going to toggle our trigger on and off and affect the day and night. So let's create our onBeginPlay method. And inside of here, let's first initialize self.entity sprite render component .sprite RUID and assign that to our self.trigger on RUID. Then let's create a Boolean that we are actually going to sync. And we'll name this trigger state to keep track of our current switch state. Then let's create a function named toggle trigger to actually switch the trigger on and off. And we're going to set this as a server-side method. And let's take a look at the code here. So we're going to set the state to the opposite of our trigger state. And then we're going to assign the trigger RUID based on whether the state is true or false. So if it's true, then we're going to set the RUID to trigger on. If it's false, then we're going to set the trigger RUID to trigger off. And then we're going to set the sprite render's RUID to the target RUID. And we're going to set the self trigger state to our state. So let's press play and see if this works. Oops, sorry, before that. In our handle trigger event, we have to make sure we're calling the toggle trigger. Okay, and then now let's try playing. And we can see that our trigger is being turned on and off. Okay, so now that we have our trigger event working, we also need to have our player side to listen in on this switch and then toggle the day on and off. So first let's send this event. So let's create a new method and name this send trigger event. And we're gonna set this as a server side. And we have to create an event type. So down here in our switch, let's right click and let's create our event type. And let's name this on switch activated. If we double click to open this, we can define some properties for our switch to transfer some information. And the only information we need is whether the switch is on or off. So we're going to do a Boolean state variable. Back to our switch component. We're going to create our new event, and we're going to set the state value to our trigger state. And let's create a new parameter for our entity. And what we're going to do is we have in our event this value that is default to our trigger enter event. So by our trigger event, it is also communicating to us which entity has entered into this trigger range. So we're going to use this entity and we're going to send our event to whatever entity triggered this handle trigger event. So if we do self send trigger event and do trigger body entity, we are now sending this switch activated event with this data, so which is our current trigger state, down to whatever triggered this switch, which of course will be our player. So on our player side, we have our custom player component attached. Let's double check. Custom player component, we have not attached it yet, so let's make sure to attach it now. And we can listen in on the switch activated event. And our listener will be self, meaning our current entity. We also have different types of listening targets. We can check for the local player. So we can listen in on the local player's entity. We can listen in on any target entity that we can define, so we can listen on the switch itself. If we did this, because the switch event is not being sent to the self, it will not actually raise this event handler. So in our case, we are sending the event to the player entity, which is what our custom player component is attached to. We are simply going to listen in on the self. So we do need our state variable, and we know that we are calling this from the server space. So let's just make sure that it's a server only. And then from our toggle day, let's set this execution space setting to server. And we're going to do a similar thing that we did in our UI for our player HUD. If the toggle state is true, then we're going to set the day to night. If the toggle state is false, then we're going to set the time to day. And then we're going to call this self toggle day, and we're going to pass in our state. And that should be it. Let's press play and let's take a look. You can see that we are toggling on and off the day as expected. And that's it for today. Today we've gone over an implementation sample of changing the time of day using events. This is only the start, and a system like this can be built up to be much more complex from here. For example, you can map the timescale for the material's blend intensity to be based on the actual time of day, so it can gradually change over time to make your world feel like time is actually moving. Hopefully you've learned something from today's video, and I can't wait to see how you build a system like this for your own world. Happy creating!